At the beginning of the series, we see Tom and his family at his wife's funeral. Tom is trying to comfort his daughter Jennifer, who appears unhappy with him. Fast forward 1 year later, we learn Tom is a surgeon. Outside the hospital, he asks his friend Pete to come to the community barbecue. In the park, there are many families enjoying a beautiful day. Among them is Jennifer, Tom's elder daughter, who is texting her boyfriend. The boyfriend Chris is having lunch with his family, but is not having a good time. His father Neil and mother Zoe are having an argument. Later, Neil tells Chris that they are getting a divorce. Back at the barbecue, a woman named Sophie sneaks out of there and meets Tom at the back. They seem to be in an intimate relationship. Another place, a girl Saya is talking to her parents who are leaving for their wedding anniversary weekend and remind her to be careful while they are away. Jennifer spots her dad coming with Sophie. Feeling hurt and confused, she decides to leave. Pete tries to stop her, but she doesn't. Now Tom is discussing with Pete about Jenny that she has a boyfriend and she is not opening up to him about anything. Tom also reveals that because he is worried about her, he has cloned her phone to read her texts but hasn't used it till now. Pete is shocked. Meanwhile, Chris leaves his home with his friends ready for a night out. Jenny chats to her sister, who compliments her on wearing Mom's watch. She informs Tom that she is going out, who asks her not to be late. Everyone is arriving at CI home for the party. Jenny shows up and spots Chris, who is clearly wasted. She doesn't look pleased. Later that night, Tom wakes up and sees that it's 2 a.m. Worried, he goes to Jenny's room and finds it empty. He calls her and leaves a voice message to come home. Concerned, he decides to check her text messages and discovers her chat with Chris. In the morning, he tries calling her again and leaves her another voicemail. His worry is growing. He wakes up Carrie and asks her to come with him. They arrive at Chris's house and ask his parents about Jenny. His parents tell him that he hasn't come home either and suggest that he must be at Ian's home. Carrie mentions that Ian goes to their school and she can find out his address. Now Tom is at Ian's house, where still no one knows where Jenny or Chris is. Ian suggests that he should ask Sia, who might know something. Meanwhile, Sophie is taking her children to her mother's house. Her son Henry, who was also at the party last night, doesn't want to go. While getting into the car, she sees her husband coming hungover. He is living in a trailer outside their house and she asks him to be a good father. Now Tom is at Sia's home, where she tells him she was outside last night and hasn't seen Jenny or Chris. Sophie is at work, where we learn that she is a detective. She meets her new colleague Emma. At the school, the detectives arrive for a case where sexual relations about a teacher and a student have been reported. Sophie finds out that the accused French teacher is Chris's mother Zoe. Sophie hangs up the call from Tom. Outside the hospital, Tom wants to talk to Pete, but he drives away, asking him to call later. Tom now has no option but to call the police to report about Jenny. Zoe comes to school and the detectives ask her to open her locker. Upon thorough search, they find a flash drive. Zoe tells them that it is not her property. When they open it, they find some naked photos of Zoe and intimate letters written to her. Emma asks her to come to the station. Cops arrive at Tom's house and inquire about Jenny and Chris. While driving, Tom spots Ian, who immediately starts running. On seeing him, Tom goes after him, and he jumps over a wall. Tom also starts running after him, and on catching him, Tom asks him why he ran. Tom suspects that Ian is hiding something. Ian reveals that Sia had a house party, and he was there as well, and most of the children were on drugs. Jenny and Chris were also there. In the police station, we see Zoe is getting scanned. Emma believes that she is lying and Sophie believes she is not. Tom again goes to Sia's house and tells her parents about the party. She apologizes and reveals that Jenny and Chris were at her place last night, but don't know when they left. Now we see Pete jogging in the park while Emma is in the car taking his photographs. Sophie reaches her home, where inside Henry is acting suspiciously. He has something with blood and hides it inside his closet. At Sia's home, her dad looks extremely nervous and her mother is crying. Her dad, looking nervous, enters the garage. Tom is driving when he gets a call from Ian, who wants to show him something. He shows him a video on someone's Facebook where they can see Jenny getting into a car and the guy is Pete. Tom is shocked. Meanwhile, in the garage, it's a horrific sight. We see the dead body of Chris inside the freezer. At the beginning of the second episode, we are in the flashback when Jojo and Lauren are celebrating their wedding anniversary in a hotel. Meanwhile, at their home, the party is in full swing. Ci comes out for a smoke and is horrified to see a dead body in the pool. Panicked, she calls her parents, but they are too busy to notice. She pulls the body out of the pool and discovers that it is Chris. Her parents see her missed calls. She rushes back into the house and stops the party, announcing that her parents are on their way home. They immediately rush back from the hotel and go to their backyard. Lauren wants to call the police, but Jojo asks were there drugs, and if yes, then was she the one to sell them? She breaks down and admits yes. Jojo decides not to call the police. He argues if they involve the cops, then Cia will go to prison, their reputation will go down the toilet, and no one in the town will do business with them. Instead, he suggests letting people think that Chris has gone missing. The next day, when Tom visited them, they lied to him. After that, they hide Chris's body inside the freezer and discuss that Jenny might already know that Chris is dead. In the present time, Tom, after watching the video, is worried and calls Pete, but he is not picking up. He rushes to Pete's home, but it's empty. Emma, with other cops, is at Zoe's home with a search warrant, but Neil has no idea what is happening. Tom meets Sophie and tells her everything. She informs him that in most of the cases the disappearance is connected to somebody known. At the station, Pete's car was identified 3 hours ago in the parking lot of a hotel. Sophie sets out to find Pete and takes Emma with her. She mentions that Zoe's son is also missing. They arrive near the hotel just in time to see Pete's car leaving. They start following him and lose him at a turn. After a while, they spot him again and pull him over. He steps out looking confused. Sophie wants to know where Jenny is, looks in the car, and finds nothing. He seems clueless and has no idea about the situation. Pete is in their car getting questioned, but instead he asks to talk to Tom and calls him. On the call, he explains that Jenny was at this party last night, where she and everybody else was drunk. She called him to pick her up, then he dropped her home. Emma asks if there is anything more than friendship between him and Jenny. He replies that he is gay. He tells Sophie that he also cares for Tom more than she knows. At home, Tom searches Jenny's room for any clues. He finds a money transfer form to a guy named Li Wei. He looks for him online. Using Carrie's iPad, he sends him a friend request, which he quickly accepts. As Tom chats with him, he discovers that he supplies fake ID. Pete arrives and they discuss Jenny's text conversations with Chris. At the police station, Emma wants to investigate Zoe, but Sophie is prioritizing Jenny's case. Tom and Pete go to see the camera footage from the neighborhood and see Jenny going into Eric's home. At the station, Emma is investigating Zoe, but she is denying all the allegations in spite of all the evidence against her. At Eric's house, they ask him about Jenny. He says that last night she ran across his lawn, triggering his security lights, and he yelled at her. Then she ran towards the back, heading in the direction of Neil and Zoe's house. Sophie is at Jojo's house and rings the bell, but no one answers. She decides to check the back near the pool. Meanwhile, the whole family is hiding inside watching them. Not finding anything substantial, Sophie leaves. Inside, they discuss moving the body. At the station, Zoe has been granted bail and is prohibited to contact anyone from the school. Tom and Pete visit Neil's house and want to look into Chris's room. They learn that Chris has a Vespa, which is not at home. Pete finds some train times and booking references. Zoe is back home and they decide to leave. At the train station, they cannot find anyone, but Tom spots a Vespa outside the station. Carrie calls Tom and informs him that Jenny is with Chris, as he has posted a photo with her just now. Jojo and his family are trying to hide Chris's body away from their home but are unable to carry it. Tom informs Sophie about the train timings and the fake ID that Jenny bought online. Later, when he checks her wardrobe, he finds the same dress that she is wearing in the photo posted by Chris. Now they know that the photo is old. It is revealed that it was Sia who used Chris's phone to post the photo online. Jojo and Sia have come to the police station to prevent further visits from the police. Upon asking about the party, she tells the detective that there was alcohol. When he asks about drugs, she claims that she has no idea. Pete informs Tom about a bar named Heaven where Jenny might have gone. Tom heads there and shows Jenny's photo. The manager tells him that any underage person couldn't have come inside. In the flashback, Tom's wife is telling him that maybe she deserved the disease. The officer who interviewed CIA tells Sophie that when he called the hotel where Jojo and Lauren stayed, he found out that they left at midnight. Chris's body is still at Jojo's house. He asks Sia to go get a rope from the garage. She goes to the garage and sees one of Jojo's friends coming to see him. Panicked that he would see the body, she takes a bottle and hits him in the head, knocking him unconscious. Emma, who is still suspicious of Pete, notes down his registration number. At the end, we see Tom's wife's grave is visited by the guy who was the manager at Heaven. At the beginning of episode 3, we flash back to the night of the party where Jenny is looking for Chris, who is nowhere to be found. Then she gets inside Pete's car. He dropped her home and she asked him not to tell her dad. Pete then sneaks inside through the back, something he never mentioned to anyone. Present-day Tom is at the train station following his only lead, train reference in Chris's scooter. Zoe is texting Chris asking him about Jenny. Sophie is going to see Henry, who is undergoing dialysis. He asks her to get his shirt from home. At Jojo's house, he and his family have tied up his friend in the bathroom. While in Henry's room, Sophie is looking for his shirt and discovers the blood-stained shirt that he had hidden earlier. Sophie then visits Zoe and asks her to make a list of people who might hold a grudge against her. Tom gets a call that makes him worry. It's some guy who knows where Jenny is and will tell him for $5,000 and asks him to not call the police. He leaves immediately with Pete. At the hospital, Sophie questions Henry about the blood. He tells her that there was a fight, but he was not in it. Tom is the assigned surgeon for Henry. Tom has arranged the cash and he and Pete have a plan. Sia blackmails Martin, accusing him of seeing her undress every time when she gets out of the pool. She then warns him and lets him go. Now Tom gets out of the train and drops off the money. He then moves to a corner and starts recording. A guy comes and takes the package and Pete starts going after him. Tom informs Pete that he is one of the bouncers from Heaven and Pete insists on leaving it to him. The bouncer gets Pete, but Tom intervenes. He reveals to them that she did come to Heaven that night and was looking for Bobby, the manager that Tom spoke to, but he wasn't there. She came alone and left. Suddenly, Tom gets a call that Carrie never arrived at the school. Meanwhile, Sia tells her parents that she took care of Martin and they don't have to worry. At the school, the teacher has no idea, so Tom requests to speak with Carrie's best friend. She tells Tom that she might be at the community center where Carrie and Jenny often visited because their mom used to work there. Tom heads to the community center and upon asking about his daughters came to know that they visit this place a lot and 4 days back they both were here. Tom is upset and struggles with his emotions as he has no idea what is going on in his daughter's life. The woman suggests to Tom that Carrie might be at the City Art Gallery where they used to visit a lot with their mother. Zoe gives the list of people to Emma who might have tried to frame her. Emma comes to get Sophie at the hospital and gives her the list. Tom arrives at the art gallery and is relieved to see Carrie there. He tells her about Heaven and Bobby, asks if she knows anything, but she doesn't. When Jojo was trying to move the body, Sophie and Emma came to visit them. They ask them about any dispute they ever had with Zoe. They tell them that it was while back about Sia's role in a musical, but nothing significant. Tom and Carrie are looking online for Bobby and discover that his real name is Archie Roberts. Sophie visits Tom and asks about Henry's dialysis, which does not look very good. They both admit to each other that they want to be together. After she left, Tom on the internet found out that Bobby used to be Rachel's boyfriend in high school. Determined to find the answer, he visits Bobby, who accepts that Jenny came to visit him that night, but he wasn't there and had no idea who she was. He confesses to Tom that he still isn't over Rachel. He gives Tom a note that Jenny left for him which says, "I know about Jasmine." Bobby has no idea what it means. Tom and Pete cannot find anything about Jasmine online. When they go look in Rachel's car, they find parking tickets to Jasmine Hall. Emma visits Sophie and reveals that the boy's photo in Zoe's locker was pulled from the internet and the photo was taken 20 years ago. Meanwhile, Jojo and Sia are dumping the body in the lake. Tom goes to Jasmine Hall and finds out that Jasmine Hall is a psychiatric institution. Meanwhile, Chris' body resurfaces and floats in the lake. Episode 4 begins in a flashback where Chris is leaving with his friends and in the party he takes drugs. He was also in a fight with a guy. In the present day, while everyone is at church, a guy who was fishing spots Chris's body. The headmaster confronts Zoe, asking her to leave, but Neil steps in and tells him to back off. Sophie and Emma arrive at the scene and identify the body. Emma, after looking at the body, is visibly nervous and suggests that they should look for Jenny in the reservoir as well. Sophie and Emma deliver the devastating news and Zoe breaks down in tears. Hoping to find some answers, Tom goes to Jasmine Hall. At the reception, he explains his situation and asks if Jenny ever visited anyone here. While waiting, Tom decides to check the visitor register by himself but gets caught. Sophie asks Zoe and Neil to make a formal identification of Chris's body. Sophie visits Tom and informs him about Chris. He becomes very scared. She tries to reassure him and he informs her about Bobby. Pete calls Tom about a medical emergency at the hospital and he leaves immediately. At the station, Sophie asks Emma to review the photographs of Chris's body, but she does not look comfortable. She breaks down and leaves. Emma confides in Sophie that she transferred here to escape the trauma of losing a fellow officer in a hit and run. Seeing Chris's body brought back those memories, but she does not want to go back. Sophie gently suggests that Emma see the force psychologist for support. In the hospital, Tom tells Pete about Chris. Suddenly, he sees a guy who he thinks was at the party that night. He asks him about it, but he denies. Tom then checks the video again and spots him with the crutches. He tries to chase him, but he disappears. Tom and Pete go to the orthopedics department and steal his information. They discover his name is Scott. From the lab results, Emma discovers that water in Chris's lungs was chlorinated, indicating he didn't drown in the reservoir. The last place he was seen was at Jojo's house, which has a pool. Jojo and the family are having a barbecue by the pool to appear normal. The police arrive and they panic. Jojo asks them to get their story straight. The neighbor also comes and tells the police about the body. Tom and Pete are waiting for Scott. He comes and they start following him. He goes to the community center where Rachel used to work and they follow him inside. They go to Rachel's office, but it is all cleared out. The woman explains to him that because of their last conversation, they decided to give away all her stuff. Scott, who frequently visited when Rachel was there, also wanted to have something of Rachel's. Tom starts going through the remaining items. Pete calls and informs that he has lost Scott. The old photos revive some old memories in Tom. Meanwhile, Jojo is at the police station with his lawyer. Sophie asks him questions, but he doesn't answer. Emma informs Sophie that the report indicates that bruising on Chris's neck might be the cause for his death. Sophie is shown the footage of the train station where she can see her husband Josh with Jenny. Chris's parents deliver the tragic news to their daughter and she is devastated. Neil goes to his room alone and has a breakdown. At the station, they find one more photo of Jenny in the neighborhood during the next morning. Now they decide to conduct a door-to-door inquiry. Pete continues spying on Scott. Sophie goes to Josh's trailer and starts searching. Josh arrives and Sophie confronts him about Jenny. He reveals that he did see her at the train station that night, but she asked him to not tell anyone. Pete calls Tom and informs him that he is still trailing Scott. While Pete was snooping on him from behind the wall, one of the guys came from the back. Pete kicks him and runs. They start chasing him. They get Pete, but he manages to run again. They corner Pete. Suddenly he goes down and sees that he has been stabbed by one of them and then by another one. They take his phone and wallet and leave him there. Tom keeps calling him but gets no response. Getting worried, he thinks of tracking his phone. Tom tracks the guys down, and after asking them about Pete, he starts beating them up. He grabs Scott and reveals to him that he is Rachel's husband and asks about Pete. Neil approaches Sophie about Chris's investigation and is reassured that he will be informed on any leads. Pete is bleeding on the road when Tom arrives. He asks Scott to call an ambulance. Sophie asks a woman about Jenny. Tom is trying to save Pete's life desperately. The woman that Sophie just questioned watches the police leave and goes inside. Inside her house, we see what we would never have expected. It's Jenny, and she is crying after learning about Chris. At the start of episode 6 in the flashback, we see Jenny going out, and outside her house she is surprised by Helen, who looks anxious and insistent about a tape that she wants from Jenny. Jenny gets rid of her and leaves with her friend. At the present moment, Pete is in the emergency room where Tom is briefing about his injuries. Meanwhile, Zoe and family are at their home consumed by grief. Emma and Sophie visit Tom at the hospital where Pete has been stabilized. While outside, Sophie asks Tom to leave the investigation to the police. Emma goes inside to see Pete. She is surprised by Tom, who thinks he has seen her before. He goes online to check her Facebook and finds some familiar faces in her profile. She comes back to see Pete. Tom asks her if she is related to Karina Castle, who was in med school with him and Pete. She tells him that Karina was her mother but passed away a few years back. She also discloses that Pete is her father. She wanted to meet him and tell him about her. She was waiting for the right moment. But first, he was a suspect in Jenny's disappearance, and now this happened. Tom consoles her that Pete is going to be fine. Outside, Tom asks Scott about the guys who stabbed Pete. He claims he doesn't know them and returns Pete's wallet. Tom wants to know about Jenny, and he drops a bombshell that Jenny was told a secret by Rachel the night she died, something she never wanted Tom to know. Tom shares this revelation with Sophie in the car. They recall the night 1 year ago when he was in the hospital and ran into Sophie. She took him out for a drink to unwind. He felt relaxed and had a few drinks turned into many. Then they both were drunk and started to make out, only to realize that they both are married. He looked at his phone with 8 missed calls from Jenny, rushed home worried, and found out the heartbreaking truth that Rachel had passed away. Back to the present day, Tom, desperate for answers, asks Carrie about anything that Jenny might have mentioned about the mom the night she died. She didn't know anything but told that Helen, their neighbor, came to visit Mom that night. Tom is checking Jenny's iPad and sees some photos of Rachel with Helen from their school days. Next morning, Tom heads to Helen's house, but no one answers the door. Meanwhile, Jojo and his family are locked in jail. They feel a profound sense of isolation, cut off from the world they once knew. They regret the past actions, grappling with guilt, replaying the moments that led them here. Jojo decides to give his statement to the police. He states that he got a call from CI about the party which got out of hand. When he arrived home, Chris, who was drunk, refused to leave, and after a physical altercation, Chris slipped and drowned. His wife and daughter knew nothing about it, and he took care of the body alone. At home, Tom and Carrie are deeply worried about Pete's condition. Tom asks her to get ready for the vigil. While scrolling through photos in her iPad, he discovers that Henry was also at the party and had blood on his shirt. Sophie and Emma visit Neil and Zoe and inform them that Jojo has confessed about Chris's death. Now we see many people arriving at the vigil for Chris. Neil attempts to thank everyone for coming, but his overwhelming grief makes him speechless. Emma, however, is not convinced by Jojo's confession and thinks that he is lying. After the vigil, Tom stops Henry and asks about the night and why there was blood on his sweater. Initially, he refuses to answer, but when they are interrupted by Sophie, he reveals that there was a fight between Chris and Mike, and he pulled them apart. He didn't say it earlier because it's hard for him to fit in, as his mother is a cop. Emma gets a crucial call from the lab that the time of death was earlier when Jojo was still at the hotel, so he couldn't have done it. Zoe is taking a walk alone when she receives a text from someone who wants to meet her. She deletes it. Carrie is deeply upset as some girl at the vigil accused Jenny of being a murderer, and if not, why didn't she come back? At the station, Emma is interrogating Jojo and asks him why he lied in his confession. He thought Chris died from a drug overdose that Sia sold him. Emma informs him that Chris' death wasn't drug-related but because he was assaulted and forcibly drowned. Tom is texting Carrie to come home early and sees that she has left her phone home. He sees that she has been texting Jenny but none of them have been read. Suddenly he sees that all the texts are read. Excited and anxious, he immediately asks her to reply. Jenny responds saying she needs help. He responds and immediately calls a tech guy to track the location of the sender. He is stunned to learn that the messages were sent from his home network. He rushes to her room and frantically searches the whole house, but she is nowhere to be found. He then goes outside and looks at his neighbor Helen's house. He goes inside and sees that there is a fire blazing and someone trapped within it. A man is watching from the outside. At the beginning of episode 6, we see in the party Mike made a derogatory comment about Zoe, and that was the reason for their fight. Meanwhile, Neil was also outside that house as well. In the present day, Tom, fearing the worst, thinks that Jenny was in the fire. When he got close, it was Helen. He immediately calls 911 and reports fire and Helen is dead. He asks his guy if Jenny is still in the house but is informed that she left and is heading east. Tom tries to go after her but is interrupted outside by the man whose name is Eric. The police mistakenly identify Tom as a suspect. Despite the confusion, he evades the capture. Meanwhile, Emma and Sophie are informing Zoe and Neil about Chris' time of death and how JoJo couldn't have been responsible. Emma presses Zoe about her relationship with Mike as he had a fight with Chris. Emma gets a call about the fire. While everyone leaves, Tilly, Chris's sister, is left alone. She hears someone trying to open the door and then hears a crash noise of breaking the door. She runs towards her room and hides in the closet. Someone comes and leaves. Tom is still trying to track Jenny's phone. He gets an address and it's Neil and Zoe's house. He arrives there and sees the broken door. Inside, one of the rooms looked like it was raided with furniture overturned and everything scattered. He cautiously goes to another room, and suddenly Tilly appears with a knife. She is terrified and assumes that Tom is the intruder who broke into the house. He tries to calm her down and explains to her that it was not him. He tells her he is Jenny's dad and shows her the picture, and she is still shaken but somewhat reassured by Tom. She puts the knife down. Old neighborhood is gathered outside Helen's house. Emma and Sophie arrive at the scene and see Helen's body. Tom asks Tilly if she has seen Jenny in her house. She tells him that someone came but she cannot tell who that was. She got really scared. Tom asks her to call her parents. He is also informed that Jenny's phone is turned off and cannot be tracked. At Helen's house, there is no evidence of any other victim. Sophie explains to Emma about bodies who die from smoke inhalation, and Helen's doesn't show those signs. All of them arrive at Neil's house. Emma asks Tom why he was in Helen's house. He tells that he thought Jenny was in there. He also explains about tracking her phone that led him there and after that here. Listening to this, Neil blames Jenny for all of this, to which Tom is not happy but Sophie holds him back. Tom then accuses Neil of hiding something as nothing but only his office has been raided in the whole house. Zoe thinks it's the same person who killed Chris and framed her in school, and then she gets a panic attack. Neil overcomes with guilt and confesses to her that it was he who tried to set her up in the school as their marriage was falling apart. The confession shocked everyone. Tom thinks Neil is hiding something, but Sophie wants Tom to stop investigating the matter himself as he is not helping himself or Jenny. One of the policemen found a phone outside Neil's house. Tom calls Carrie and cannot find her at home. Sophie arrives and reminds him that she is with Josh and Ellen. He is relieved. Sophie then shows him the phone that they found. Tom confirms that it belongs to Jenny. He shares his fears with Sophie. He thinks that if Jenny trusted him, she would have come to him first. Sophie tries to comfort him. Next day, Tilly tells Zoe that she never wants to see her father after what he did, but Zoe explains to her that he is not a bad person. Meanwhile, Neil is sitting in a bar watching old photos of his family and reliving the old memories. At the police station, Sophie tells Emma she will get a statement from Tom when he will get back from the hospital as Pete has regained consciousness. Emma is relieved but does not show outside. Labs have reported that Helen died before the fire because of a skull fracture and fire accelerant was also used. They also found a purse at her house. In the hospital, Tom sees some guy visiting Pete. Tom asks Pete about him. First he lies, then tells that they have been seeing each other for 6 months. He really likes him, but the guy is married. Tom gets a call from Sophie, who informs him about the purse they found, which might belong to Jenny. She also informs him that if there was any other person at the house other than Helen, they would be a murder suspect. At the station, a boy arrives claiming to confess to murder Chris and would only talk to Sophie. It's Mike. In the car, Pete expresses doubts about Jenny's innocence, citing the mounting evidence. But Tom disagrees and thinks that it is Neil who is hiding something. At the station, Mike confesses that he hit Chris that night, which may have caused his death. Sophie informs him that he died because of drowning and not because of a punch. Emma is with Eric to take his statement, but the man looks a bit weird. He tells her that a few years back there was a fire at the school and he lost everything on that day. Meanwhile, Tom tracks Neil down, who is at the site of the vigil. Tom asks him again about Jenny. He says he doesn't know. Zoe arrives and says she wants to confess something, but Neil already knows because he followed her to the same party Chris was at and found her with Ian. It was Ian who was texting her the whole time and was heartbroken after she left him. Sophie goes to Josh's trailer to ask Henry for dinner. She also invites Josh and he gladly accepts. At the park, it seems that Zoe and Neil have reconciled and put aside their conflicts. Now what we see inside heaven is surprising. It is Bobby and he is with Jenny. At the beginning of episode 7, Pete is proud of Ian because of his relationship with his teacher. Tom says that he is going to see Ian and Pete wants to join him, but Tom advises him to rest. He knocks on Ian's door, but no one answers. Now Tom sees a car across the road and realizes that it looks like Bobby's but with different plates. Pete, who is driving to his home, realizes that he is being followed. After a while, he stops his car to confront. It's Emma. He is frustrated and tells her instead of suspecting him, she should be doing some real work. As he turns to leave, she cries that she is his daughter. Pete is very surprised. She tells him about her mother and that she came to this town to find him. Overwhelmed by emotions, Pete embraces Emma. Tom wants to see the security footage at the gate, but the guard refuses as he cannot give away the information that might compromise a police investigation. Tom then resorts to blackmail him to show him the tape. Pete and Emma are sharing their life stories. Emma tells him that she is pregnant and shares the heartbreaking loss of her boyfriend in the line of duty. Emma expresses her desire that she would love to have Pete in her life. Pete, equally emotional, admits that he also needs her in his life. Meanwhile, Tom is checking the footage of the day of the fire. He spots Bobby in his car. Now he also finds Ian and accuses him of lying about the night of the party. He also drops the bombshell that Neil knows about him and Zoe. Ian reveals that night when he was waiting outside the loo, Jenny was in there and she was with Henry. Now Tom visits Sophie's where Josh is sleeping outside. He asks her if he can question Henry about the party as he suspects he is hiding something. Sophie refuses, insisting that Henry is a bad liar and she would know if he was hiding anything. Tom goes to see Pete and is pleasantly surprised to see him with Emma. Tom shares his concern about Henry and thinks Sophie might be protecting him. Emma offers to talk to Henry and Tom agrees. Sophie is leaving home and asks Josh to look after the kids. In the car, Tom and Pete are discussing why would Bobby come to the community in his car with altered plates and leave it outside an empty house. Meanwhile, Emma is at Sophie's house and wants to question Henry regarding the party, but Josh refuses and insists on calling Sophie first. Pete and Tom decide to go to heaven. They ask for Bobby, but he is not there, deciding to stay low to order something and take a seat. Meanwhile, Emma takes Henry to the station and there Sophie tells her that she is out of order. Emma insists that it is just routine questioning for the investigation, but Sophie does not like that. At the bar, Pete manages to find out the passcode for the door. Tom takes a chance and sneaks inside. Bobby is watching him on the security camera while Jenny is there not looking good. Tom goes into his office. At the station, Emma asks Henry about his interaction with Jenny at the party. He told her that in the washroom she showed him her phone about this weird app. He discovered that it was a spying app to send her texts to another phone. She got really upset and blamed her dad and started cursing him and Henry's mother. Suddenly, Henry starts to have a seizure attack and he collapses. In the bar, Pete tries to stop the waitress who was heading inside but fails. He quickly warns Tom, who hides behind the door. The woman sees him, ignores his presence, and leaves. Tom takes a document and makes his way out. However, the woman intercepts him on the stairs, warns him about Bobby, and asks him to leave immediately. While trying to go out, they spot Eric in the bar, who leaves immediately after seeing them, arousing suspicion. They go outside and cannot find him. After looking for him around the block, Pete spots him going back again. There, Pete cleverly sneaks his phone into Eric's pocket to track him. Outside the station, Sophie blames Emma for Henry's condition. In the car, Tom and Pete are tracking him and think that he is just going home. From the document that Tom took, they discover that Bobby owns another place that was destroyed in an arson attack. Sophie calls him and informs about Henry. She wants him to come to the hospital. Tom arrives at the hospital and Josh is upset with him and thinks this is his fault. Emma is again interrogating Jojo, hoping to uncover any missing detail. It is revealed that while cleaning the pool, Jojo found Saya's pendant in it. In the hospital, Henry's condition is stable. Sophie informs Tom that Jenny knew that he was spying on her. Now Tom and Pete resume tracking Eric. They follow him to Jasmine Hall. At the reception, they lie about being with Eric, then try to sneak in but get caught. Tom is being held by the security when Eric intervenes. He takes him inside to his son Craig, who is half burnt. Emma takes CA to take that pendant. She reveals that it does not belong to her. Back at Jasmine Hall, Eric tells Tom that his son never recovered from the fire incident at the school. Tom wants to know why Rachel visited him. He reveals that the fire in the school was caused due to the 5 kids as a prank, but it got out of hand, in which 8 people died and Craig was involved. The other people who were involved were Bobby, Helen, Rachel, and the last name that shook Tom was Sophie. At the beginning of episode 6, tension mounts as Tom confronts Sophie and she finally reveals the harrowing truth. That night they broke into school to take revenge from a teacher they hated. It was supposed to be a simple prank, but after a while it got out of hand and they decided to run. Suddenly they saw the security camera. To cover their tracks, they looked for the tape and got it. Craig saw some kids in the camera feed and rushed to warn them. Outside, they realized that Craig was not with them. Now Sophie tries to justify that back then they were just children and got really scared. Until now they could never tell it to anyone for the sake of their children. Tom realizes that Jenny might have uncovered the truth. Rachel was also trying to tell them something before she died. Tom now comes to the conclusion that Bobby might have killed Chris and Helen. He insists that Sophie must help him to get to him. Sophie calls Bobby and tells him that she knows he killed Helen. He reveals that she had kept the tape, to which Sophie says that she has got it, and the only problem left is Jenny. He admits that he has her. She asks to come over and take care of the situation, and he agrees and wants her to come alone. In the flashback after Rachel died, Jenny was going through her mother's belongings. She finds her diary and goes to visit Helen to talk about her mother. Helen fetches an old photo album and sets aside a tape that catches Jenny's eye. Jenny starts to ask questions about their past and the incident which Rachel hasn't mentioned clearly in her diary. Helen got anxious and asked her to leave immediately. While going out, Jenny stole the tape. Now she takes the tape to Chris and they start to watch it. They see the recording date and Jenny spots Rachel and her mother. As they dig deeper, they realize that the tape is from the day of a tragic fire that claimed 8 lives. Now they look for all the other people and find Craig, Bobby, and finally Sophie. Chris is furious. He thinks Sophie is a hypocrite and wants to confront her. However, Jenny denies and decides to talk to Bobby after the party that night. Chris still insists on talking to Sophie, but Jenny begs him not to. Jenny cannot find Chris after the party, so she decides to take his Vespa and heads to heaven. She didn't find Bobby and left a note for him. Still unable to find Chris, she goes to Helen and reveals that she knows everything. Helen admits it and says she told everyone that she had destroyed the tape. Jenny explains how the secret haunted her mother all her life. Jenny, overwhelmed, does not want to go home as her father, who hates Chris, has bugged her phone, and she don't know how to break the news about her mother's past. After hearing about Chris's death, she was devastated. Helen asks her if he knew about the tape and then calls Bobby. Bobby comes to Helen's home and she informs him that she wants the truth to come out. Bobby kills her and takes Jenny with him. In the present day, Sophie and Tom are driving to see Bobby. She says that after getting Jenny, she will admit to the fire and wants Tom to help Josh with the kids. He agrees. Tom gets out of the car and Sophie goes to Bobby's. He buzzes her in. She discreetly opens the fire exit for Tom, allowing him to slip in. Just as she enters his apartment, he points a gun at her and wants the tape. She insists that she has just as much to lose and asks about Jenny. She goes in where she sees Jenny, who is desperate to go home. Tom quietly enters the apartment. Meanwhile, Jenny is explaining to Sophie. Tom notices Bobby with the gun. Bobby spots Tom, and after a struggle between the three, Bobby gets the gun. Tom pleads with Bobby, urging him not to kill Jenny, as she is Rachel's daughter. Bobby, overwhelmed with emotions and the weight of his actions, shoots himself in the head. Tom, overwhelmed with relief, hugs Jenny tightly. Sophie calls the police. Outside, Tom asks Sophie to not confess about the fire and Jenny agrees. She wants her to think of her children. Back at their home, Emma is taking Jenny's statement. It is still not clear who killed Chris, as Bobby didn't know about the tape then. It doesn't make any sense. Then Emma shows her the pendant from the crime scene. Tom's world turned upside down as he recognized it, but kept quiet. He then visits Sophie and asks her to confess to Chris's murder. Sophie, weighed down by guilt, admits it and tells him that night she went to get Henry. She saw Chris, who was smoking outside. He confronted her and told her about the secret. He also informed her he had the tape. She confessed to him and he recorded her voice. Feeling cornered, she forced him to give it back, and after a physical confrontation she drowned him, deleted the recording and fled. She admits she did all this to keep her family together. Tom, overwhelmed by her confession, does not want to bury any more secrets. While hugging her, he calls the police. She is taken into custody and sent to jail.